As I grew up in a family of 4 going on road trips, every road trip I went on seemed to culminate in an annual ritual, which was my dad telling an epic story of his own, a road trip he took when he was a 14-year-old boy. The story then starts with my dad, 14 years old, growing up in Spokane, Washington. It features a brand new 1958 Volkswagen Beetle, the first brand new car that my grandfather had ever purchased, which for him was a big deal as a bricklayer at Kaiser Aluminum there in Spokane, Washington. Then, as now, this Bug was the world's most popular car. In addition to my dad on the trip and his parents, they managed to squeeze into the Bug his grandfather and his 2 little brothers. The back seat of a Bug's not big, and that many, four people in the back makes for a pretty tight quarters. So they did what every family does with the little brother. Right? They stuck him in the back window. So for 2,000 miles round trip from Spokane, Washington to Fairview, Utah, they rode in this new 1958 Bug with the little brother, Uncle Kurt, crammed in the back window. Now the road trip really is epic in the minds of my dad and his family. But this VW Bug actually did a lot more than road trips. Like millions of other families like theirs, this Bug opened up a world of opportunity. It enabled them to search out solutions to their problems that they wouldn't have been able to do without the greater mobility that was enabled by this humble Bug. And so it was for millions of other families just like theirs. Starting with families like the Jodes coming out of the Dust Bowl, escaping the Dust Bowl, through to my father's family in Spokane, Washington, through the construction and creation of the interstate system that integrated states into a national economy. Cars for the last century have empowered people to solve their problems in more productive and in more profitable ways. And that lesson is not just a lesson in the American economy. It's a general principle that greater mobility empowers individuals to better search out solutions to the problems that they know. To illustrate this point, I want to illustrate the point with a much simpler technology. Thank you, David. So, meet the world's most popular bike. This is the Hero Jet. The Hero Jet is built in India by Hero Cycles Limited, an Indian company. You can see the design here is actually mostly pre-World War II. Rod brakes, dynamo lights, heavy-duty rack in the back, heavy-duty kickstand, signature top tube covers and signature seat covers. This bike, and there are hundreds and hundreds of millions of them in South Asia, in China, and many just like this in those places, and many similar to this in Africa. This bike opens up a world of opportunity to the poor. It opens up a world of opportunity because with a bike, you can transport 5 times as much stuff in 1/3 the time. And the poor find really creative ways to make use of this capacity. Very creative folks using a bike, using bikes in very creative ways. So think for a second, where are all these folks going? Where are they headed? And I'll give you a hint. They're all headed to the same place. They're all headed to a market. They're all headed to a market. They're headed to a market because they see an opportunity. They see the opportunity because they have a bike. Because they have a bike, they search out over a broader landscape, a broader scale, they search out opportunities and create new markets. This is development on a bike. Okay. Today what I want to do is take this concept of development on a bike to sort of change the way we think about poverty and to share just a few simple ideas from my own field of work, development economics. Okay. So to do that, it's helpful, I think, to start with a contrast. Contrasting a traditional conventional view of development as aid, with development on a bike. So here are some differences. Development on aid sees the poor as passive. It sees the poor as recipients primarily. Development on a bike sees them as proactive. Development as aid sees the poor in need of experts and planners. Development on a bike sees the poor searching out solutions for the problems that they know well, because they go to bed at night with those problems and they wake up in the morning with those same problems. Development as aid sees the poor in need of development agencies. Development on a bike sees the poor themselves as the ultimate agents of development. Now this, especially given the research that I do, this, I admit, is a very simplistic caricature of these two extremes. Okay. Now there are many in the past 10 years who've staked out positions on either ends of that spectrum. Okay, I don't want to stake out yet another position at the extreme. What I want to do is take where I think most of us begin, which is a little bit more towards the left, seeing the poor as recipients, reading media reports about aid and food aid and famine, and maybe just change a little bit the way we think about the poor. Sometimes development on a bike is literally on a bike. And there are two NGOs that best characterize this literal interpretation of development on a bike. These two. So the first is a group called World Bicycle Relief based in Chicago. Their approach to development is literally on a bike. You can see this is taken from an annual report, and you can't see the small font there, but it says, "In the hands of a girl, this bike changes everything." So they focus on the power of a bike to open up educational opportunities for the poor, especially girls. The power of a bike to open up opportunities for nurses and healthcare workers to expand the number of villages they can visit. And the power of a bike to open up opportunities to create new markets and new opportunities for entrepreneurs, like this dairy farmer strapping his milk jug onto the rack of his bike. Okay. They also work closely with local manufacturers to build up capacity to actually manufacture bikes locally. The other one is a little bit different. Bicycles Against Poverty was actually an NGO that was started by Bucknell students in 2007, a relatively recent NGO, focused similarly on the power of a bike to open opportunities. They, in addition to providing bikes, they work closely with microfinance organizations to provide bicycle loans, to allow the poor to themselves invest in bikes. Sometimes development on a bike quite literally is on a bike. Other times, development on a bike is more metaphorical. It's a metaphor for how mobility allows the poor to search out solutions to the problems that they face. To illustrate this more metaphorical interpretation, let me share just a little bit from a context I know. Colleagues and I, for the past 10 years, have done quite a bit of work in East Africa, working with pastoralists like this guy, a Borana pastoralist in southern Ethiopia, to try to understand how mobility affects welfare and how their welfare changes over time based on mobility. So it turns out that in this setting, as you can see, a very barren, stark environment. A stark environment where for him and his family, 90% or more of their daily needs are met by the animals that they raise, these livestock. For these pastoralists, mobility is everything. Migrating their herds to the best pastures, to the best watering holes is essential to survival. So it is for this guy, who has maybe 40 animals in his herd, if he can effectively migrate to the best watering holes and the best rangelands over the course of a few seasons, he can expect to grow his herd from maybe 20 to 30 to 40 animals. So that illustrates a general principle of this metaphorical interpretation of development on a bike, and that is that mobility can spark a chain reaction of improvements. That is to say that if you can search out better solutions today because of greater mobility, your opportunity set tomorrow is expanded, and your capacity to search out solutions tomorrow similarly is expanded. But mobility in this harsh context cuts both ways. For a small herder who has less than 7 or 8 animals, migrating long distances to take advantage of spatial variations in rainfall to get to the best pasture is really difficult. Okay? So in this setting, your capacity to migrate is a direct function of the size of your herd. So a small herder cannot take advantage of the same opportunities that a big herder can. And because of that, over the course of a few seasons, the small herder can expect their herd to go from 7 or 8 animals to 6 or 5 animals to 4 animals until they really have to abandon livestock herding altogether. And in this setting, there's not a lot else, a lot of other livelihood options to support a family. So immobility in a similar way can create poverty traps. Again, the general lesson here, which is a really potent one, is that development on a bike as a metaphor for the poor searching for solutions, it's dynamic, it's inherently dynamic. Because opportunities today, creating and tapping opportunities today, expands our capacity to search out solutions tomorrow. Okay, there are even deeper roots here that I want to explore a bit. Okay, the deeper roots have to do with entrepreneurship. Those photos we saw of people all going to market, they were going to market because they saw an opportunity. In a class I teach here on campus, I've taught it for several quarters, a big undergraduate class called the Introduction to Economic Development, International Economic Development. It's a class of 200 or 300 students. I've taught it several times, so now I have data from several students on this question. I ask this question, and I'll ask that you think about it. I require them to respond. You can think about these questions. How entrepreneurial are Americans? Say on a scale of 1 to 10. How entrepreneurial are Europeans? Scale of 1 to 10. And what about Africans? Okay, so I've compiled data from all these responses I've gotten now over the course of the last 3 or 4 years. And this is what it looks like. Here's for Americans. Okay, so this is not at all entrepreneurial, a 1. Extremely entrepreneurial is a 10. And that's over about 600 or 700 undergraduate students here at Davis. Okay, what about Europeans? Okay. What about Africans? So you see a pattern. The perception is that Africans are much less entrepreneurial than Americans. Okay. That I think actually is probably, we could go beyond UC Davis students and get a similar pattern. I think that's probably a pretty prevalent perception of entrepreneurship. But it stands in stark contrast to the way many economists think about the idea of entrepreneurship. Many economists see that as something that's just fundamental to human nature. It's problem solving, it's motivated problem solving. So some of the leading economists in that vein, in a really interesting recent book on the history of enterprise, they take all their evidence and they make this claim, that entrepreneurship is an innate impulse that cuts across cultures and time periods. Okay. So if that's true, 2 questions are likely to come to mind. So one is, does that mean that everyone can be an entrepreneur? And the answer, sadly, is no. Just like not everyone can be a great mathematician or an engineer or an artist, these are capacities that differ across the population. But what it does mean is that no country or culture has a monopoly on entrepreneurial ability, right? That great entrepreneurs are just as likely to be born in Malawi as they are in Michigan. The second question that might come up with this statement is sort of how do we reconcile these two, right? This perception of entrepreneurship versus this idea that it's an innate impulse. So there's an answer to that too. The answer is that we often think of entrepreneurship in a too restrictive way. The definition we have in mind is too restrictive. In the US, we think of entrepreneurs as those who they take a risk, start a new business with the hopes of profiting from it. Okay? But in other settings that are not, in other societies that are not driven by markets, things are a little different, right? So in a very state-dominated society, entrepreneurs are the ones who find ways to gain favor with government officials. In very corrupt places, Entrepreneurs are those who find new forms of corruption. And when you start thinking about a broader definition of motivated problem solving, you realize that the laws and rules and norms of society are really focused that innate impulse. In some places, it leads to very productive outcomes. In others, to very destructive outcomes. But it's an innate impulse, and it's what we see in development on a bike. Okay, so to wrap up, one question that comes up with this is this one, right? Does this mean, does development on a bike as a concept, does it mean that poverty will remedy itself? Well, it can. It often does, actually. The poor do an enormous amount for themselves. But often their capacity to search out solutions is constrained by forces beyond themselves. So there is need for help. There is need for help. And some of these are pretty apparent from what we've talked about. Bikes, literally development on a bike. Roads, infrastructure, education, recognizing opportunities. Communications, we could have done a different talk today called development on a cell phone. Cell phones in the past 5 years around the world have revolutionized markets. Communications, and then rules and norms that encourage and focus that innate impulse in the right way. Might have to have you advance. Okay. So development on a bike, it does imply helping the poor, but it implies helping the poor based on a different way of seeing poverty. Okay. Can you advance one more? Okay, so this is what it means. Go ahead. Next one. So it means seeing development on a bike means appreciating the poor as agents of development, who themselves solve problems because they know their problems intimately. It means appreciating how a humble bike or bike-like improvements in the capacity of the poor to search out solutions can really produce big dynamic benefits. One more. It means appreciating how society channels the innate entrepreneurial impulse for good or bad. And last one. It means seeing the poor pedaling their hero jets to market, to work, or to school as more than people on bikes. It means seeing them as a reason for hope in a future where the poor continue to search out solutions to their problems, but do so more effectively. A future where their kids might create possibilities that today are unimaginable. Thank you.